discussion of marriage, which is um, one of the most important sacraments in Orthodox life. What did we say before that a sacrament is? A sacrament is a visible means of invisible grace. So you have visible bread and wine, but invisibly it's the body and blood of Jesus. You have visible water, but invisibly you go into it, and invisibly you enter into the tomb of Jesus Christ and come out. A sacrament is a physical medium by which God transmits His grace. And so in this case, we're talking about the sacrament of marriage, which is something that takes place in the church. Although this is the only sacrament of all the sacraments that the church celebrates that, in some senses, predates the church's manifestation on earth. What do I mean by that? The church has always understood marriage to be something primordial. The union of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden was considered a marriage. They were united to one another as husband and wife, even though there was no Orthodox priest around to bless it. It's something that's written into our nature. That's important, first of all, because it's true. Like, I was doing some Googling around, okay, so not super in depth research, but it seems to me that marriage is a human universal, or pretty much universal. There's never been a society that has not recognized man woman lifelong marriage. Sometimes they can have more than one partner involved in the mix, but for the most part, that basic union of one man, one woman for life is recognized by all societies everywhere at all times. It is just something that's part of us as human beings. And so that's why in the Orthodox Church we can look at someone who was married not in the church. Steve and Cheryl, you've been together for how long?
Since 96.
Married for 25 years. You are not married in the Orthodox Church, but we do not consider you just as boyfriend and girlfriend. You were married, in a real meaningful sense.
I don't know who she is.
And Kent and Jane, it's the same thing. Even though an Orthodox priest wasn't there to bless it, it is still marriage in a real sense. So this is the only sacrament that is of all the sacraments we're going to talk about that it's not outside of God, but in a sense it exists outside of the church as well. Okay, so let's dive right in. What does the Orthodox Church think about marriage? Well, if you've ever been to an Orthodox wedding ceremony and you've paid attention to the prayers, one of the things you'll notice, and I notice very much, is someone who celebrated a number of weddings, is that the church makes a big deal about the fact that Jesus' first public miracle was performed at a wedding. That is not, the church sees that as completely meaningful and not at all accidental or random or arbitrary. From the church's point of view, Jesus' presence at a wedding was symbolic of the fact that he declares marriage holy. So, a wedding is a place where he himself is willing to go, and everywhere God goes, basically, is sanctified merely by virtue of the fact that he goes there. So the very fact that Jesus was a guest at a wedding, was present at it, is enough to symbolize that marriage is holy. But even more than that, he performs a miracle at the wedding. He turns water into wine when they've run out of wine, and to sort of increase the celebrations. God doesn't just want to bless the marriage; He wants it to be a joyful marriage. He wants it to be a happy thing. So the church has always ascribed massive significance to the fact that Jesus makes himself known at a wedding, and therefore marriage is something holy. This, of course, is not the only Bible passage. Like I said, we give great significance to the fact that Adam and Eve were married in the Garden of Eden, and also the end of the Bible, the end of the book of Revelation, involves the wedding feast of the Lamb, the union of Jesus Christ and his church at the end of time. So it's sometimes said that the Bible begins with a marriage and ends with a marriage, and it's because marriage is something very, very significant. Okay, so marriage is something important and holy. So we know marriage is good, but what is marriage all about? What's its meaning? And in order to, I'm sure that there are multiple angles from which you could sort of attack that question, but the book we're using, the Faith by Clark Carlton, I think takes it in a useful direction, which is to say that in order to understand the deep nature of marriage, we need to understand the nature of what brings people together to be married in the first place. We need to understand the nature of what is sexual desire. What is this force that, since time immemorial has exercised a huge amount of power over men and women and caused them to want to enter into these unions? So what is because that's what marriage that's what is the impetus for marriage in the begin with. Now, is that all? Is that all that marriage is about? No, of course not. Anyone who's married knows that in the final analysis only plays a small part. But that is the most singularly unique part of marriage that distinguishes it from any other friendship. Is what makes me married to my wife? Is it the fact that we live with each other? No, because I live with people I'm not married to. I live with my children. I live with my mother-in-law. I had roommates in college. To live together is not to be married. Is it the fact that we love each other? Well, no, I love lots of people. I love my dad and my mom. I have friends I love. I'm not married to them either. What is the one singular, unique characteristic that unites me and my wife? And it's the fact that we're joined as husband and wife in a physical way. That is, so it's not the most. It's not what occupies married people most of the time day to day, but that is the most unique and distinctive part of marriage, is that it's a sexual union. And that's what distinguishes it from any other type of agreement or arrangement human beings can enter into. But where does it come from? Where are its roots? As we have said in previous classes, and that's why I really like the way this book works. It starts with the abstract foundations and concretizes it in real life. I've just said before that the Trinity is creator of all. So everything in the entire universe, in some sense, bears like the stamp of the Trinity. So just like all the clothes you have say made in China, made in Vietnam, everything in every rock, every tree says made by the Holy Trinity, even though it doesn't say it in words. But even more especially is human beings bear the image of the Trinity. So even if everything has the fingerprints of the Trinity in some way, human beings are the express image. There's something about us which directly reflects the Trinity. And what is the Trinity? The Trinity is one God in three persons. So three distinct persons who are truly unique, nevertheless sharing in one being, all living and existing as one God. This, of course, is a mystery. But the Father lives for and in and through the Son. The Son lives for and through and in the Father, and the Spirit, lives for and in through them, and so on and so forth. So, as we've said before, the word that's sometimes used to describe what is the interrelationship of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, the Greek word used is perichoresis, this dance of love, this movement, this continual dynamic movement of each person into the other. If you think about this for more than a moment, you can understand in what way sexual desire and the desire to be married is a reflection of this. The sexual desire in its purest form reflects something of the Trinity. Sex and sexual desire is a physical manifestation of eros, the Greek word for eros, the form of love, which is the yearning, the longing which each person of the Trinity has for one another, and each human being by nature has for God. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that there's any sort of passionate, physical, carnal love between the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, but that pure and immaterial love that they have between one another is manifest in one way in the physical world by the desire that men and women have for each other by nature. So we have a holy monk of Manathos writing, I think, a very good quote. But what more than anything else manifests the imprint of God on the human soul is the power of desire, eros, within the soul, and the impetus which a sanctified eros lends the soul in its movement towards its divine archetype. The saints, especially Maximus the Confessor, and Dionysius the Areopagite, understand this power of eroticism as not referring simply to human sexual desire. To put it better, the sexual urge is an expression of that natural yearning which is implanted in us, within us by our Creator, and leads us towards Him. So the Father loves and longs and yearns for the Son, who loves and longs and yearns for the Spirit. We, each of us, love and long and yearn for God. Most of us recognize that somewhat consciously, but all human beings experience that, even if they're not fully conscious of it. Now, keep in mind, when you're loving and longing and yearning for God, there's no arousal going on, or God help you if there is. But the sexual desires we experience it on earth is just a sort of manifestation for that. It is the desire for another, to go outside oneself, to possess and have and hold someone who is not yourself, and to bring the two of you together. So sexual desire in its pure form is longing for the other. It's perhaps analogous to the selfless love that Father, Son, and Holy Spirit have for one another. And in that way, when it's pure, most of the time, by the way, we encounter or even experience sexual desire in ourselves or in the world around us, it's impure. It's been tainted by egoism, by sin, by all these other problems. So don't just, look at the random thing you're seeing advertised on a billboard and say, "Oh, this is a reflection of God's love." It's very, very distorted. If it is in any way, it's a very, very distorted form. But we're talking about sexual desire in its pure form. Now, keep in mind, evil has no essence. Evil does not exist by nature. Everything that exists is fundamentally good. Evil is always a twisting and a distortion of the good. Sexual desire in this world is not inherently evil, and that's important actually, because a lot of the heresies that Christianity did battle with in the early centuries of the church, some of them would actually say that sexual desire is inherently sinful and it's inherently impure, and that you shouldn't even have a husband or wife to have sex with. You should just be completely abstinent. They were called incratians, and guess what? They don't exist now because they didn't have any children. And but these thoughts, these ideas are out there. There have been people in the past and even in the modern day who have this idea that it's inherently filthy, it's inherently impure. To be sure, in the modern day, most of the ways you encounter it are impure and filthy, but at its core, it's something good.
Weren't the
Yeah.
Shakers like that? The only way you could really truly be pure is not to have any sexual.
I don't know too much about American religious history, but I feel like I've heard
That's
that.
like
Yeah.
you're saying they're not around anymore. Their chairs are. They make really good chairs.
But as a group, they don't exist anymore. Yeah. Michael, you said something.
I forget the verse, but in Genesis, after the flood, doesn't God explicitly say, "Go forth and multiply"? Or
Oh yeah, before the flood. Yeah, be fruitful and multiply. God says it to the human beings, and He says it to the animals as well.
Yeah.
So there's a divine imperative. There's a divine, and this is something, the law is to assert all of God's commands are to a certain degree written on our hearts. When we experience, that sort of desire for another person, we're actually responding to the voice of God in a certain sense within us. However, we're often directing it in very, very bad ways. But at its core, that impulse to be fruitful and multiply is from God. Absolutely. But evil has no essence. It is a distortion of the good. It can't exist in itself. It's always parasitic off of what already exists. The devil can't create anything new that's fundamentally evil to its core. He can only take good things and misdirect them. So sexual desire becomes evil because it in this fallen world, it's fundamentally self-oriented. It's rooted in self-gratification. It's rooted in what can you do for me? How can you make me feel? How can I use you as an object or to further my own ends? The pure form of desire is desire for the sake of the other, purely and entirely selfless. And desire, as we see it and experience it most of the time, is desire for my sake. What can you do for me? How can you benefit me? So that's a total inversion. It's taking the base thing and completely flipping it on its head. Pornography, of course, is the apotheosis of this. Is like the ultimate form of objectifying and consuming another human being as an object. It's not when someone's watching pornography, they're not even interacting with the person on the screen. It's something entirely private, and you're doing by yourself for your own gratification. That's a complete distortion and destruction and twisting of God's intention for human sexuality. There's nothing like the Trinity in that. It's satanic. Our participation in the Orthodox Church is about our healing, right? I'm sure you've heard before the metaphor that the church is a hospital. We are sick. If you come here to become an Orthodox Christian, I hope it's because there's an understanding, at least in part, that there's something wrong with you. You are not right, and you need to be healed. And that's good because this is the place where you get healed. Everything that the church, that's why Jesus is like number one miracle, along with exorcisms, was healings. He healed, he healed, he healed. He didn't ever make fire come down from the sky. He didn't fly around or do anything, though he could have. He healed, because he showed that his purpose on earth is to make people whole. And that should be your purpose in becoming an Orthodox Christian. So the Orthodox, our participation in the Orthodox Church is about our healing and reordering of our disordered drives. Now, we have a lot of drives, and they're all disordered. So it's not just our sexual desire, but our desire for food is totally disordered. That's what we call gluttony. Our desire, our impulse towards anger is totally disordered. We're supposed to be angry about injustice. We're supposed to be angry when we see things going wrong. But oftentimes we're angry just because we're inconvenienced or we're impatient or so on and so forth. These are the misdirection of our drives. These are what are called the passions. And sexual desire is no different. So if you're going to be an Orthodox Christian, that means you're trying to be healed and you're trying to cooperate with God to heal you. Every commandment that God gives, every rule that the church has is oriented towards your benefit, for you to live rightly so that you can live better and be healed and enter into a relationship with Him. So the Orthodox Church gives us two paths there are two paths through which the Orthodox Church reorders and heals our sexual desire. And these are marriage and celibacy. Marriage and celibacy. Two options. There's not people out there, these modern day, have coming up with all different kinds of alternative arrangements. But that's not what God's original plan was. So celibacy we're actually going to be talking about in our next class. We're going to be talking about monasticism. So that should be next week. Today, like we said, we're going to be talking about marriage. Marriage has its most basic aim to direct our sexual desires to one person for the rest of our lives. That's the most. That's how marriage is lived out. That's the unique thing about marriage, is that it's a healthy outlet for our sexuality. Sexual desire is an incredibly powerful thing. It's the best metaphor I've ever heard for it is like fire. Is fire good or bad? Well, fire just it is. And fire can heat your home if you put it in the fireplace. But if you take it out of the fireplace, you have a whole lot of problems.
Yeah, you might burn your house down.
Likewise, sexual desire, in a community of persons, it's a really healthy thing because it's welding the families together. It's making the husband and wife love each other. It's producing kids, which are growing and participating in the community. But one well-placed affair, or God forbid, an episode of abuse or something, will destroy that community. So as long as it's maintained between the husbands and the wives, it's a good thing, and it's growing and it's strengthening the bonds between all the people. But once the fire gets out of the fireplace, God help you, you can have a lot of real problems.
I don't know if this guy was right on all the way or wrong all the way, but I think he was on to something. There was a book that was written a number of years ago. I read part of it. I never finished it. It was called Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. And it talks about the differences between men and women. And we both need each other to complement that other part of humanity that we're not. And it creates balance.
That's so true. I've never read the book, but it's like something I've very powerfully experienced in my own marriage. I mean, we're going to get to that, but yeah, part of what marriage is about is learning to live with a creature that's different, that's like you in some way, But it's not like living with a dog or a chimpanzee, right. Although some people might feel like that sometimes. But it's living with a creature that's like you, but different, but very different, who thinks different, who behaves different, who expects different things, and we'll get to that. So the first is, like I said, it's a healthy outlet for sexuality. Again, sex in a marriage is great. It brings the people together. It strengthens the bond, and it produces children. Outside the marriage, it could cause more or less damage, but it's always causing damage of some kind. It does not come. Now, some people, say it's not natural for human beings to be monogamous. But actually human beings, because of evolution or XYZ reason, are meant to sow their wild oats or what have you. That's only true of our fallen state. That's only true of the fact that our natures are warped by sin, and we're living, like I said in my sermon today, we're blind to the actual true nature of reality. Reality, as we experience it just in ordinary day-to-day life, is significantly distorted from what God intended to it. So yes, we find it hard. We might find it hard to be monogamous. It might not come naturally to us. Our eyes, we might feel that our eyes naturally wander, but that's just because sin has penetrated us so deeply. Natural is God's way, because that's what's going to be the eternal world. This world is passing away. Don't get too attached to how things are. And all explanations that have to do with evolution or whatever are necessarily speculative. To be sure, there's some sort of Darwinian processes have happened in human history. But if you want to say, oh, humans are exist in XYZ way because of evolution, well, you could never really prove that unless you went back there with a camera and were watching these early populations of humans and how they behaved. It's all speculative. So even though it's scientists in white lab coats with PhDs saying it, don't put too much, don't get your understanding of human nature from that, because it's speculative. Humans are meant to the healthy way, and of course this is something that is documented scientifically. Human beings flourish more. Human societies and human communities do better when people get married and stay married. One woman for life. I was reading actually from an evolutionary psychologist. Doesn't believe in God, doesn't anything. But Steven Pinker the other day, my dad shared me an article. He's been he doesn't believe in God. He's a total evolution guy, but he says it's been demonstrated marriage reduces crime. In communities where people get married and stay married, there's less crime. Solid families increase the social order and get rid of all the things that lead to, yes.
Some fun stuff you can go down that rabbit hole. The data is pretty much rock solid. The single greatest indicator of success later on in life is the presence of an established mother and father figure in the household growing up. And the single greatest indicator of high societal violence is polygamy.
Interesting. I knew about the first part. I didn't know about the second part. I went to a lecture by a researcher when I was in undergrad at Georgetown University. Who a researcher was invited on campus, basically to live a lecture on that. And he just proves all this data, boom, 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 about men, both for men and women, they're happier, they're healthier, and their outcomes are better if they grow up with mom and dad in the home. And it was like it turned into such a circus, because there was like not a total circus, like he was able to give his talk, but like the LGBT student group came and protested and said basically you're a bigot, and he's like he's coming out with all these facts and stuff, and they're just saying, well, you're a jerk. So okay, well, it doesn't really change the reality. Yes.
So on the subject of polygamy, like I've always been kind of confused when you read about David and how he had multiple wives, and it also says that he walked in the ways of God all his life. Is that because he repented of all that, or is it just because it was like that was just the standard at the time? Or
that's a good question. Certainly, polygamy in the Bible is never commanded by God. But it's definitely clearly tolerated by God. And Abraham had multiple wives, and Jacob had multiple wives. It's probably a concession to human weakness, the same way that God allowed divorce in the Old Testament, but he came out very hard against it. It's also probably related to the conditions of the time. What do I mean by that? These were societies that were a lot more violent, which means a lot more men died, which means there was a disproportionate number of women relative to men. So it is not God's plan for polygamy. And of course, now in the Christian era, it's a total sin. It's not acceptable in any way. But at the time, it might have been something that made sense, because you had this population imbalance, and otherwise you just have these single women just hanging out, I don't know, doing whatever, twiddling their thumbs.
I mean, one man can make a whole bunch of babies in a
Right.
very short period of time, where
Yeah.
even the biggest I think I've ever heard of, maybe septuplets? I mean, it might be the
Really?
biggest one that's ever been, I don't know. But a woman can only produce one every night.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
in these kind of societies where you need a lot of men in a hurry.
Well, yeah, that's actually exactly it. Not only were men dying more often, but people in general, the mortality rate was high. So not only did you need to have more men, but I think you might have needed to have more babies in general. Again, it was because of the world was fallen. This was not good. This was not ideal, but this was acceptable given the circumstances. However, even within that, there was sin, because David did commit sins by taking his lieutenant's wife and having him killed. So not everything David did was blessed. Yeah, did you?
Yeah, that's what was always explained to me. It's like it's not explicitly forbidden for any number of reasons. However, it always ends poorly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's why the ideal was always Adam and Eve are the ideal, but also among the children of Abraham, there was one monogamous couple, which was Isaac and Rebekah. So is to my knowledge, if I remember correctly, and that was kind of held up as the sort of ideal.
And where polygamy does exist in the Bible, it almost always produces nasty results.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, because David had problematic children.
Yeah, his sons. I was getting ready to say. I don't remember their names exactly.
Absalom rebelled against him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It did not go well.
Jeroboam and Rehoboam.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. So okay. So the primary purpose of marriage. Do I mean primary? Maybe what I mean is the most basic purpose of marriage is a healthy outlet for sexual desire. Number two is the second, but almost equally important purpose of marriage, which is the spiritual purpose, and that's the subjugation of the ego. The subjugation of the ego. Again, everyone who's married doesn't need this explained to them. You're going to you're learning. The primordial archetype is the relationship of Christ to the church. Maleness and femaleness, the difference between uncreated God and created world. But the uncreated God came into the world and made himself humble and did everything he could for the sake of the church. He did not come to the earth to be a tyrant or something. But and that's why one of the reasons, not the only reason it's important that marriage is between a man and a woman and not a man and a man or a woman and a woman, is because part of what is accomplished in marriage is you're learning to live with a creature that's different from you. I'm sorry to keep repeating this, but anyone who's married just knows this. It is a man in general thinks differently from a woman. In general, behaves differently from a woman. In general, has different standards for certain things. And you don't. And when you first get married, you don't like that about each other. And you just try to conform the other. You try to make the other one more like you, and then you get frustrated when you're like, "Why are you this way? Is there something wrong with you?" So I've definitely had the experience that I definitely experience what I've talked to other people. They've experienced my first year of marriage. For all the words about honeymoon, my first year of marriage was my hardest year of marriage because you're learning to adjust. You're learning to not do things your way, to do things someone else's way. And that's the humbling of the ego. And that's breaking you down. And that's just yielding. And that's just saying I'm sorry a lot. And that's just asking for forgiveness a lot. And just not doing what you want when you want it. That's the humbling of the ego. And our ego is our biggest problem insofar as it comes to our relationship with God. Our biggest problem is that we want to do things our own way. And that makes it impossible to have a relationship with God because a relationship with God requires obedience, requires humility, requires submission. So the primordial archetype of the church is the primordial archetype of marriage. In addition to like Adam and Eve, is really the relationship of God to the church. So this is, I'll read to you from the. Well, actually, can someone hand me one of those Orthodox Study Bibles that's up there? We had to clean up. We had to clean up for the bishop. So everything's in order. I'll just read the book of Ephesians, chapter 5, verse 22 to 33. So this is the epistle that is read at an Orthodox wedding, and it gets some people's underwear in a twist, and if you don't know why, you're going to hear why.
I know why.
But this is what's read at every wedding. Wives submit. So no.
Yeah, that gets,
Giving thanks always for all things to God the Father in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, submitting to one another in the fear of the Lord. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as also Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, just as the church is subject to Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself to her, that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word, that he might present her to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as the Lord does the church. For we are members of his body, of his flesh and of his bones. For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let each one of you in particular so love his own wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. So, you can probably hear what people complain about, which is that whole wives submit to your husbands bit. Which is funny, because when Paul first wrote this letter, I think the Roman society he was speaking to had more of a problem with the husbands love your wives bit. Everyone understood their views of gender and relations were totally different. What do we mean? We need to unpack this a little bit, because I think in our modern sort of democratic age, we hear submission in terms of domination. You know, the patriarchy, like, you know, the husband rules his wife with an iron fist or something. Well, first of all, you understand the first lines we read were submitting to one another in fear of the Lord. Submitting to one another in the fear of the Lord. The process of marriage is about destroying both of your egos, the man's as well as the woman's. It's not just, hey, woman, do what I say, you know, fetch me my martini and my slippers or what have you. It's about both of you are being broken down. Both of you are learning to be humble. Both of you are learning to do the other things the other way. So don't forget that the first words are submitting to one another in the fear of God. That being said, there is a real sense which, in the understanding of the Orthodox Church, the husband is the head of the household. I think this comes naturally to people. I've always, when I've observed people's dating and marriages, you know, women generally pursue men who take initiative, who take charge, who have a sort of leaderliness about themselves. It seems to me that is a fundamental part of male-female relations. And I've never heard a woman say, like, I love it when my husband rolls over like a wet noodle. I love how passive he is. I love how, like, no, I mean, there's a certain leaderliness that comes with manliness. That being said, it's not domination and submission. It's because that bit about what wives submit to their husbands is balanced out by husbands love your wives the way Christ loved to the church. How did Christ love the church? To death. He gave everything. The wife submits to her husband, but the husband submits himself to the family, to the wife and to the family as a whole. He submits his very life, his very being, and his well-being for the sake of everyone else. So yes, there's a real sense in which a man's the head of the household, but this is a responsibility and not a privilege. It's not him getting what he wants all the time, and the woman just doing what he wants. It's both of them are sacrificing themselves for the other and for the common good. It is a relationship of mutual sacrifice and mutual submission. Both spouses must submit to one another in terms of sexual relationships as well. And this is, again, it's funny when modern day commentators get upset. They say, oh, Christianity is oppressive to women or this or that, because in the Roman world, this was the Romans were worried that Christianity liberated women too much, because actually this is it elevated them to have an equal status and dignity to the man within those different relationships. But so here's first Corinthians 7:4-5. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. You know, so in ancient Roman society, husband has authority over the wife's body. Yeah, we got it. We understand. The wife has authority over her husband's body? What? You know, men have to be faithful too. Men have to submit their entire selves to it. It's equally shameful, disgraceful, and against God when men run around and be promiscuous. Do not deprive one another, except with consent for a time, that you may give yourselves to fasting and prayer, and come together again so that Satan does not tempt you because of your lack of self control. So you have to give your entire body to your wife. She has to give her entire body to you. You belong to each other. It's not a. Please join us. It's not a contract, and this is something I say that is important. If you get married in what do you call it, in the synagogue, if you participate in a Jewish, if you get married as a Jew or if you get married as a Muslim, the key part of that is the signing of a contract. It's called the ketubah in Hebrew. I forget what it's called in Arabic for the Muslims, but marriage is fundamentally in agreement. In the Orthodox Church, in the classical Christian understanding, marriage, there's no signing of anything. In the modern day, we sign something because the state of Virginia wants all that, and so on and so forth, and we need records. But the sacrament is what matters. The prayers you say are what make you husband and wife. Marriage in the church is not something you. I mean, it is something you're agreeing to. It's something you're consenting to, but it's not an agreement. It's something that transcends that. It is a new reality being born between the two of you, which is the joining of husband and wife. So through marriage. So you two become one flesh, and you submit to each other, and in that way your ego is broken down, and that makes you a vessel for the Holy Spirit to dwell in. I think all of us maybe have had the experience. I grew up in a very happy home, and even though we weren't very religious, I always understood that my family was something of a reflection of the kingdom of heaven. Dad, mom, 2.5 kids. Something about that spoke to the relationship of God in the world. I always felt that even intuitively. I believe in that very strongly. That a happy home with a husband and wife and kids is a reflection of the kingdom of heaven, because it's an image of Christ coming together with the church. So through marriage, sexual relations are properly channeled and ego is overcome. This is a mystical image of Christ in the church. This union is by its very nature life-giving. So because we said sexual desire is in some way images the love of the Trinity, then it's only a natural outflowing that sexual desire, when properly directed, is life-giving. Just the way the love of the Trinity is life-giving. God created. He did not have to create. He created because he wanted to share himself with others. Likewise, the love between a man and a woman is naturally generative of life, and that's where children come from. So if you didn't know before now, there's no stork, there's no birds and bees. It's just mom and dad. I'm sorry. So children are a non-negotiable part of marriage. So the church does not bless deliberate childlessness. And I cannot marry anyone if they say, yes, we want to be married, but we intend not to have children. That's wrong. Of course, there's infertility. Of course, there's issues. That's not a sin, of course. You didn't choose that. And in fact, it's a tragedy. But if you want to live your life, just the two of you, because you have to have continual medical intervention in some form, whether it's a pill or something else, in order to truly stop child having. And this is, sexual desire is by its nature generative of life. Unless you have continuous medical intervention between a healthy man and a healthy woman, kids are going to pop out at some point. This is the reason why extramarital sex is so problematic, is because we're playing with the equipment for life, and we're taking it very casually, and we don't see how much life has to be destroyed to maintain how things are, because abortion is something that happens in secret behind closed doors. You never see it, and only if you're directly involved with it, do you even know what's happening. So we don't mind it, we don't think anything of it, but it actually is really terrible destruction of human life, and that's kind of the human cost of the sexually libertine culture we have right now. A lot of abortion and other things have to happen in order to maintain our culture the way it is, where we feel like kids don't come out of sex. They do, always. Reproduction is not the purpose of marriage. Reproduction is not the purpose of marriage. The physical purpose is the restraint of sexual desire. The spiritual purpose is the destruction of ego. But the reproduction is not the purpose, but they're the natural result. If you don't intervene medically in some way, children just naturally happen. Okay. Any questions so far or comments?
Just to underscore what you were saying about Ephesians and also in Colossians, you got to remember the world. St. Paul or whoever was writing his name. There's some debate as to who actually wrote those two books, but it's not worth getting into that here. But the culture that they were in was something called the pater familias. The father has absolute authority over the entire household. All the children, the wife, the slaves, complete control, even to death. And if a child is born, the first thing that is done is the child is brought to the father. The father looks at the child. If he picks the child up, that's his child. If he turns his back, the child is taken outside and left to die out in the street, or picked up by a brothel keeper, or eaten by animals, or whatever. This, even some of the famous writers in Roman society said, well, if the child doesn't please the father, throw it away.
Yeah,
That's the culture.
This is real, and this is very horrifying part about the Roman society that Christianity grew up in. Is, in order to have that sort of libertine sexuality, you're going to have a lot of babies being produced, and something needs to happen to them. In the modern day, it's behind closed doors. It's quick and clean. It's still evil, but it's hidden. In the ancient Roman Empire, there was a lot of infant exposure, and in the Greek world too, the pre-Christian Greek world. And so if you didn't want a baby, you have to do something with it. You put it outside in the wilderness, where often it died of exposure, but many times it would be picked up by a slaver or a brothel keeper or something and be used is like chattel. Alternatively, the Christians, one of the things that defined Christians was that they would go and look for babies like that and raise them in loving homes. So that was one of the unique things that the early Christians were doing to fight that evil culture of the time. So yes, if you have free love, free will, and sexuality, you're going to have extra lives come out of that you need to dispose of. And that's part of the reason it's really not right. Okay, good. Everyone have their packet? Okay. The Fathers speak. This is St. John Chrysostom on marriage and family life. You have seen the amount of obedience necessary. Now hear about the amount of love necessary. Do you want your wife to be obedient to you as the church is to Christ? Then be responsible for the same providential care of her as the Christ is for the church. And even if it becomes necessary for you to give your life for her, yes, even to endure and undergo suffering of any kind, do not refuse. In the same way, then, as he honored her by putting at his feet one who turned her back on him, as he accomplished this not with threats or violence or terror or anything else like that, but through his untiring love, so also you should behave toward your wife. Even if you see her belittling you or despising and mocking you, still you will be able to subject her to yourself through affection, kindness, and your great regard for her. There is no influence more powerful than the bond of love, especially for husband and wife. A servant can be taught submission through fear, but even he, if provoked too much, will soon seek his escape. But one's partner for life, the mother of one's children, the source of one's every joy, should never be fettered with fear and threats, but with love and patience. What kind of marriage can there be when the wife is afraid of her husband? What sort of satisfaction could a husband himself has if he lives with his wife as if she were a slave, and not with a woman by her own free will? Suffer anything for her sake, but never disgrace her, for Christ never did this with his church. That's why it's so important to read the Bible within the Orthodox tradition, because you can read that passage about wives submit to your husbands in all kinds of different ways, especially in ways that you like. You need to have the commentators, you need to have the fathers and the saints interpret them for you so that you know a proper way to understand what God is teaching us. Okay. Special study, God and Gender. And this book was originally written, I think, in the 90s. So this is a new version that was updated in 2023 or 2022, but it was originally written in 1997. So I don't know how outdated or updated this God and Gender thing is. I haven't even read it yet. Few issues are as explosive in our society as those involving gender and religion. The Orthodox Christian addresses these issues within the framework of the Church's self-understanding as the bride of Christ. Whether the issue at hand is inclusive language or the role of women in the Church or homosexual desire, the answer lies in the great mystery, Christ in the Church. The peoples of the ancient world frequently worshipped female deities, accepted priestesses, and thought nothing of homosexual behavior. Israel, however, stood alone in rejecting all of these practices. The reason for this lies in God's revelation of himself as being radically distinct from his creation. We have said that the world was created ex nihilo. Between the being of God and the being of the world, there's an irreducible gulf. The world is not God, has never been God, and never will be God. The fact that God has united creation to himself in the incarnation in no way destroys the distinction between God, the uncreated and the created. In Christ, we participate in the uncreated grace of God, becoming by that grace what he is by nature, yet we never cease being creatures. Our created nature is never transformed into the divine nature. The difference between God and the world is expressed iconically by the disexuality of human nature. In the divine scriptures, God is always represented by the male and the creation by the female. God is the bridegroom, and the world, or more precisely the church, which is the world recreated in Christ, is the bride. God, of course, is neither male nor female. He is beyond all such created concepts. Nevertheless, he has given us certain images and concepts whereby we have come to know him. Though these concepts can never fully describe or define the indescribable God, we are nonetheless bound by them. It is true that the scriptures occasionally use female imagery in regard to God. For example, Christ said of Jerusalem, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often I would have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathereth her chickens under her wings, and yet ye would not." This is, however, a simile. Christ called God Father, not Mother. Christ is the Son of God, not the daughter of God. The use of inclusive or even gender-neutral language about God is an egregious violation of the integrity of Scriptures and of the liturgy. To call God Mother is nothing less than to introduce a different God. Inclusive language blurs the distinction between the Creator and creation, elevating the creation, that is, the female, to the place of God, and thereby returning us once again to the original sin. From this, should be evident why it is impossible for the Church to have priestesses. The male, because he is a creature, can represent God only iconically. The female, however, is creation. The church is essentially female. If, therefore, the priest, who is the image of Christ the bridegroom, is a female, then what happens to the male principle? Once again, the distinction between creator and creation is destroyed and a new religion is born. Actually, it is an old religion, that it is reborn, the religion of pantheism, which Israel and the church rejected. The inherent disexuality of human nature and its iconic relationship to Christ and the church also explains the church's attitude toward homosexual desire. Notice the context in which St. Paul addresses the issue. Who changed the truth of God into the lie, and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever? For this cause God gave them up to vile affections, for even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature, and likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust toward one another, men with men working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves the recompense of their error, which was meat. For St. Paul, homosexual desire is not only a result of the fall, it is actually paradigmatic in the fall, much in the same way that marriage is paradigmatic of Christ's saving relationship to the church. It is clear, therefore, that sexuality can be rightly expressed only in holy matrimony or in celibacy. Okay, it's a lot to go over here, a lot to unpack, a lot of controversial statements. Really shouldn't be controversial, but they are. What's the issue of homosexuality? When Paul says homosexuality is unnatural, people say, well, of course it's natural. It's found in nature. You know, you can find all these videos of chimpanzees doing God knows what to each other. That's not what St. Paul means when he says natural. When he says it's unnatural, he means your body is not meant to be used that way. And well, I'll save my comments to not on the screen on the recorded, but I think a little bit of reflection shows that homosexual interaction is not the way that your body is meant to be used. Your sexual organs have a clear function with one another and not for any other part of your body, and that's why we can say it's unnatural. The other is with regards to the male priesthood. I think one of the key important things about the priesthood is that it is a fatherly role. And you psychologically, spiritually, emotionally, you respond to a priest as a father. The best example of that for me is, I have at least one relative in my extended family who is just all, doesn't like the Orthodox Church, and her stated reason is that the Orthodox Church does not allow women to be ordained. She's a woman, she finds that offensive, so on and so forth. I say, okay, you have all of these other churches. You have the Methodists, the Episcopalians, what have you. do you go to any of those churches because you want to follow a priestess? No, I don't. Well, I think your issues with the Orthodox Church are something else than what you're saying. In fact, in general, all of these churches that do have ordained women, they don't have a lot of members and they end up losing them kind of rapidly. Whatever it is about us psychologically, the way we're made up, we follow. What we look for in a spiritual leader is a father figure, and I think that's what we respond to. You even find the same thing in cults. If I can use like a really extreme example, but there are very few cults that are led by women. I think when people are looking for a spiritual leader, they're looking for a father. That's not to say there aren't holy women in the Orthodox Church, and not even holy women leaders. I go to Panagia Prusiotis Monastery all the time down in North Carolina. I was there this past week. I saw the abbess. I kissed her hand because she's a holy woman and she's a leader of her community, and she has Christ's grace dwelling within her. So it's not like all men are good and all women are bad, or that women can't be leaders or holy or something like that. It's just the specific role of the priesthood is a fatherly role, and people respond to that, regardless of what they say. That's how they think and behave. Okay, questions, comments, concerns? I know it's a volatile subject. Yes.
Just one, a couple of thoughts. Number one is in Mark 12, when the Sadducees, when the Pharisees, Sadducees, and scribe come to Christ, in the middle of those challenges, Christ is really explicit in Mark 24, I think 24 to 27. He said, "You don't understand the scriptures." What parable am I talking about? That was the 7 brothers and the one widow.
Oh yeah.
And so you've said something today that's really important, that we see faintly in a glimpse, and a lot of what we see that we think is natural is not natural, because Christ himself said, "You don't know the scriptures, because in the kingdom there will be no giving of man and woman in marriage." Right, because he's the bridegroom. No
Very
one else.
interesting. Very interesting.
Him
Very
alone.
interesting.
And I have taught on this and gotten put a lot of pushback on it. But
Mhm.
it says God made man, meaning mankind, male and female in his image. So each one of us are a unique creation that God crafted. This is not a challenge. It's just, I hope, a little bit expansive. Reproduction, as we see it, is not just male and female. Because God says, "I knew you by name before I knit you together in your mother's womb." So God creates, even if we screw up the ideal God gave us and the commands he gave us of one man, one woman. But the marriage bond, as we understand it, dissolves at the end of life, at the end of this chapter of life. And so I just wanted to, your comment, both in liturgy and here, is really, really important. We have to see things from God's perspective, as Christ teaches us.
Yeah, I think you're right. Absolutely. I mean, as a married man, I'd like to think that something like marriage, my marriage, is going to be able to continue in the next life. But it's going to be whatever it is between me and my wife. We're still going to love each other. We're still going to have a relationship. It's going to be different. It's not going to be marriage as we know it on this earth. Yes.
And if the liturgy is done properly, is done orthodox, male and female is represented in the liturgy
Absolutely.
as Christ and the church.
Absolutely.
So if you were to have a female act as the priest, as a priestess, you're leaving the male out.
Yeah, it would turn the symbolism of the ceremony upside down. That's interesting. That's a really interesting comment. Yeah, there's deep meaning. When things mean nothing, you can just interchange, all of the people, all the players. You guys could be the priest one day, and I could sit in the audience. Why not? But when the ceremony itself actually has meaning embedded into it, then you have to be very careful with any changes you make. Yeah.
I do have to offer an alternative point of view at this point.
By all means.
For almost 20 years, the rector of my parish was a woman.
Mm-hmm.
She was the best rector we ever had at St. James.
Mm-hmm.
What can I tell you? I mean, she was she retired last year or 2 years ago, but she was a wonderful homiletician. She was very insightful person. She was really fantastic, and our church did well, and we had gone through some rough times before that. Men who were well intentioned but didn't have that
Yeah.
ability. Connecting with people is sometimes difficult to do. It's irrespective of whether what they're trying to do is good or bad. You've got to connect with the person first before you can go
Yeah.
somewhere. And so the guys we had before, two of them, she had it.
Sure.
What can I say?
Sure. That's yeah. And of course, what I'm saying is not that no woman is ever capable of leading a community. Obviously, I was citing the example of the monastery, which has been going on for a long time and thriving under the leadership of this holy woman. But on the one hand, in aggregate, I think it wouldn't work, even if certain specific women possess that unique charisma, that unique gift that doesn't translate into like a population level thing. And on the other hand, this was what denomination?
Episcopal.
Episcopal, yeah. So that it was not priesthood as we understand it. It was
That might be
she was the
just
leader. She was the
another
leader
thing
of a
too.
community,
Yeah.
but not. That wasn't priesthood as we understand it. That wasn't liturgy as we understand it. That was something similar, but
Very
Yeah.
similar.
well, with meaningful differences. Yeah.
I just saw something funny recently because of like the Pope being chosen. I just saw it on TikTok. There's these women like protesting for like the Catholic Church trying to get more women to or trying to have women be able to be ordained, and they're like doing like pink smoke, and I'm like, that just kind of goes against, I'm not Catholic, and like I just feel like that's kind of going against even what like Catholics believe.
Right. Like if you took it seriously, why would you want to make such crazy changes, right? That's what I perceive in a lot of people, and not just like the gender people, but a lot of people who want to make big changes to the Catholic Church, to the Orthodox Church. Kind of strikes me as like, do you even really believe? Like, do you even take it seriously? Because it seems like you're full of disrespect for the institution, for the ceremonies. Like, come on, you can go start your own thing over here, and you don't have to treat it as sacred or anything. But at least me, Father Theodore, I believe in what we're doing here. I might be crazy, I might be completely mentally deranged, but I really do believe that this is all real and therefore meaningful and therefore non-negotiable. If you want to do your own thing somewhere else, do it over there. Anyway. Okay. Where did our Lord perform his first public miracle? This is questions for reflection on the back. Wedding at Cana. How does the resurrection of Christ affect our understanding of the purpose of marriage? I don't even remember if this was addressed. The purpose of marriage is for salvation. You are being made a citizen of heaven through your marriage. Your ego is being broken down so that the Holy Spirit can enter you. And that's why I said, in a home where husband and wife are holy and devote themselves to God, God is present, and you feel it. How did the fathers understand the power of human eroticism?
The manifestation of Eros.
Yeah, it's a manifestation of divine love. Why did Adam and Eve not realize they were naked before the fall? Oh, we didn't touch this. Because I can't even remember what the correct answer for this was. Sorry. What was the first reason? What is the first reason for marriage, or maybe say the physical reason, the basic reason? To channel sexual desire in a healthy outlet. Yeah. What is the only reason Jesus allowed for divorce? Okay, I didn't touch on this either. Adultery. Yeah. So that's why in the Orthodox Church, even though in Orthodoxy and in which is early Christianity, is extremely high view of marriage. Like that marriage is one man, one woman for life. Let what God has joined together, let no man put asunder. It is recognized that there are situations when a marriage can be dissolved and no longer be valid. And that's a big distinction, meaningful distinction between us and the Catholic Church, where they say even if they have all kinds of rules now because now you can get an annulment, and that's kind of like cheating. Even if the husband flies away across Earth and never sees his wife again, well, she can't get married again because she's technically still married to him. It's cruel and that's messed up. Yeah.
I was just wondering, you said the only way to be remarried is adultery, right? Well, what about death?
Yeah. Death dissolves marriage, is Ken was saying. Although again, yeah,
You can also become desensitized to sexual desire. Um, One of my close friends when I was young, he was a veteran
hmm
from the Second World War, and he served in the South Pacific, in New Guinea, and they saw women all the time. Nothing, no clothing on
Yeah.
at all. There was no sexual interest
mm,
there whatsoever. Because the culture didn't.
right,
They didn't look like us. The women didn't
Right.
look like Hollywood actresses.
right. You see certain pictures of National Geographic, and it's hardly,
Yeah.
hardly pornography.
Well, that's the way they live. Okay,
Yeah. Yeah, I understand. Sure. What? Whom does the husband image forth in marriage? Whom does the wife image forth? Christ in the church, created, uncreated. What is the response? The key thing is that they're different from each other. A man is a different sort of thing than a woman is. Just like God is a different sort of thing than the creation. What is the responsibility of the wife in marriage? To submit to the husband. What is the responsibility of the husband? To love his wife as Christ loved the church. So again, it's submission in another form. What role do children play in marriage? Natural byproduct. Yes,
Fruit of the womb is a gift of God.
gift of God.
That's what it says.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a gift of God. But they're going to go. In a sense, they'll always be part of your marriage because they'll always be your children. But they have to go on and start their own lives at some point. And at the end of the day, it's the husband and wife. It's the most fundamental part of that marriage. Yes.
I just wanted to say, as someone who was married for 28 years and had 3 different weddings, the reason they give you a crowning in the Orthodox Church is because the marriage is a martyrdom.
Mm.
It can become the cross you carry.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you are not only working on your own salvation, but you're also helping your spouse with their salvation. So it is when they say that you have a choice between marriage or monasticism, they are both equally martyrdom and
Yeah.
part of bearing your cross.
Yeah. So just for those who might not have caught it, a crown in the Orthodox Church it's symbolic of royalty, but it's also symbolic of the martyrs. Because a crown was like a laurel wreath, like you have at the Olympics, that you put on an athlete who is victorious. And in the early Christian tradition, the early Orthodox tradition, martyrs were treated as victorious athletes because they, as St. Paul said, they ran the race, they kept the faith. Even though they were tortured and killed, they didn't renounce Christ, and so they were symbolized with crowns, like victorious athletes. So when you get a crown in the Orthodox Church, it's partly a crown of royalty because you're going to be ruling over a new household. You're going to be generating a new family social unit, and you're going to be the king and queen of that household. And at the same time, it's also a crown of martyrdom because it is a contest. You are fighting. You're at war with yourself primarily. You're not at war with your spouse. You're at war with yourself by means of your spouse, and you're going to be humbled. Okay.